Okay, well, I think we'll get rolling. So, welcome everybody to, this is our third now, cocktail hour chat with 9th Biennial artists. This is basically our virtual alternative program for hosting an artist reception for the biennial because we had it so early in the run here. And I'd like to just give everybody a quick briefer on the biennial. Has been a statewide traveling show that is a biennial run every 2 years. So we work on organizing it 1 year, and then the next year it travels across the state to multiple institutions. So the first biennial launched in 2003. It's got a really long, great history. There's always been some sort of juried component. And we've kind of gotten over the last few biennials into a really good pattern of statewide jurors from the institutions that host the shows getting together and jurying and curating sometimes some selections of artists for the exhibition. But basically it's an open call show, so any South Dakota artist who lives and works here now can submit works for the show. So it's a really great way. And then we also try to encourage a lot of really solid, more experienced professionals to be a part of it too. So we think of it as a really professional show that's also open to really emerging artists. So it's an exciting way to see some work from artists that we know and love for a very, very long time with fresh up and comers. It's always a really great mixture of different types of media, materials, processes, perspectives, aesthetics, and styles. So we love it. We think it's a really important way to support and encourage the artist community in the state and expose people in the state to the artists of the state and also visitors, because it does travel for a year. So a lot of folks from out of state get a chance to see it too. And then another great component of the biennial is that we are funded through the South Dakota Arts Council. And so we have some funding for purchase awards. So not only do we exhibit South Dakota artists, we get to collect them for our institutions. So we're fond of the biennial. We don't intend to drop it anytime soon. And we're excited to be able to essentially have this alternative reception where we're hearing from 30 artists over 8 weeks. So 30 of the 66 artists in the show we're hearing from through these chats. So we are very excited to have Vickie Schumacher, Desy Schoenewies, and Chris Meyer with us tonight. What I did when I put the call out to see who wanted to chat with us was I kind of took the list of comers for participating and divided them up into groups where I found some sort of common thread. And that was a trick in itself. It was quite a puzzle, but I think that Vickie, Desy, and Chris were the only 3 of the, what I counted tonight as 9 artists who reference or speak to the COVID-19 pandemic in their artworks or their artist statements for the show. They were the only 3 who are speaking. So I thought they were great to put together because a reflection on their experience of the pandemic came through in their artworks and their statements for the show. But what I really love about it is I think that their perspectives and their styles and their practices are really quite different. So it'll be fun to hear from 3 very different artists tonight who clearly had the pandemic come into their thinking as they're working on works in the recent, past year and submitting them for the biennial. So we are excited to have you all. It is a cocktail hour. I always have to say I do have a drink with me. You are welcome to drink, eat. And then what we like to do is we'll give each artist about 10 or 15 minutes to share a little bit about their work. And then if you have questions along the way, go ahead and feel free to throw it into the chat. And once everybody's finished, then too, we'll kind of open it up to questions. So feel free to throw them out or save them up for later, and we'll ask some questions at the end and get to know 3 more artists a little bit better tonight. So thank you all for coming. Thank you for watching at home if you watch later. And we will go ahead and introduce Vickie Schumacher and let her take the floor. And if you have trouble sharing the screen, just give us a holler, we'll help you out. Thanks,
Okay.
Vickie.
All right, well, I'll turn it on the share screen. And I'm from Sioux Falls, first off, I want to say that. And I had spent a lot of time in this area and going to Brookings to see my sisters and my mom and the Brookings drawing group. And the Brookings community has been very, very supportive of my art. I really appreciate that. Okay, this show beginning. Okay.
There we go. There you go,
Okay.
Vickie.
All right, that's good.
Yeah.
All right. It's still saying my internet connection is unstable, but I'll keep going. Okay. Okay. So I need to give Carolyn the cue to change the slide.
Yes. Yep.
Okay. All right. So this was taken at a nature printing workshop probably 5 years ago or so, and I frequently teach nature printing for the this International Nature Printing Society. It sounds important, but we have annual workshops. Okay, we can go on to the next one. This is really reminiscent of what my usual style is, so I wanted to start out with that. And this is the piece in the show, and it's a mask, and I really hadn't even intended it to go in the show. I just made the mask. I don't know, I was really sick of COVID, I guess, and then I made a box to go with it. Shows a little bit of the virus on there, and so you can keep your special mask in its special box. But I guess that for me, it's just the raven, the crow. They're kind of symbolic of disastrous times and fear, and so that's kind of symbolic of the COVID for me. With it's always there lurking, and the dead trees, there's nowhere to hide. It was really a hard time for me. I had a very hard year. Yeah. All right, go on to the next one. Okay. As you can see, it was a hard year, but when I was going back and searching in my Google Photos for art, and I just clicked it on art, and this came up. I completely forgot I had done this, but it was in a sketchbook, and it's dated really about a year ago. And I don't, that kind of sums up the way I was feeling too. I just seemed really desolate, and every time you turn on the TV, that's all you heard about was just, COVID, and it was just sad, and everything was horrible. You couldn't go anywhere, and if I wanted to go to the store, I could go at 7 in the morning. So it was a weird time. And the next one. And then this is a painting I did later in the summer. And John, I don't know if you'll recognize this, but it's based on a drawing from the Brookings Drawing Group. Probably did it 10 years ago. I don't know, but I just found it and I kind of liked it, and I just started painting on the drawing itself, really. And then I just kept adding more and more stuff to it. It's sort of a therapeutic thing. You can see in there's a mask on the floor. See it in front of the window. And you can see that she's isolated in her apartment, her house, because of COVID and all that it implies. And then we've got a cat looking out the window at the bird. And I guess I have a kind of a thing about birds anyway. So we have pet birds also. So, but they're interacting, but there is the glass between them, the cat and the bird. And I've actually taken it off of that board now, but I kind of like the way it looked, because I think I had just finished it and I took that picture. Okay, next one. And I wanted to go back to what I traditionally have done, which is, it appears pretty light and fluffy compared to the COVID stuff. And I love doing nature prints. I love nature and being out around it, and collecting the plants, and then going home. And, I started this really before we had much access to internet, and I'd have to go through all these books and references to find out what the plant was called. And it was kind of a treasure hunt and a lot of fun for me to do. This one, I've also printed a dragonfly in there. I printed the wings and then painted in the body. And I used a wash in the background to show more of the grasses that are coming up there. But these are fall plants, as you can see. Okay, that next one. And this is arrowhead arum, or arrow arum, I think it's called. And it grows in, lake streams. And I found this here when we were canoeing at Lake Alvin one time, and printed it and added a watercolor background to it. I also added the grasses. I think those are all watercolored into there. When I say watercolor, we're actually using a diluted acrylic, because I prefer acrylics to watercolors. I'm trying to learn how to use watercolors, but acrylics, they just, I don't know, they're easy to use for me. All right, the next one, another nature print. And this is springtime instead of fall. These are printed on, this is a full-size sheet of Stonehenge printmaking paper, in case you're wondering about that. And I use an oil-based ink, and they're all printed individually, and then the butterflies, I printed the wings on there. And up in the corner, you can see that I have listed the individual plants and things that are showing up in here. So it is a nature study. Okay, and the next one. Here are a couple more nature prints. And the wild roses are from Big Stone Lake area. And the grape, I don't know, I think that grapevine is like from Tuttle Park. And then I painted in the grapes on it. And that piece, I think, is at the Arboretum here in Sioux Falls. All right, thank you. And this is something I've been experimenting with over the years. I kind of get restless with one type of media and try to experiment a little bit. So this is done on unprimed canvas. And so the size of the swallowtail one is probably about 4 by 6 feet maybe. And I use just dyes and really big barbecue basting brushes to get started on there. And then I went in and just kind of fine-tuned it more with some paint. I believe that the swallowtail has some iridescent oil paint on it. And then the peacock feather, I took that piece of canvas outside, and I actually was throwing paint, the dye onto it, and then brought it in and just drew and painted the peacock feather, and that uses that iridescent, or metallic, I guess it is, a metallic Daniel Smith oil paint. And I used pastel on that also. Okay. And then back to birds. I'm still doing this unprimed canvas here, and I don't know, these are a little goofy. I don't know if anyone out there likes to read science fiction, or do you like, or fantasy, like Ursula K. Le Guin. And so I had read this whole Earthsea series. I really liked it. And in one of the books, our main character is walking kind of the line between, death, life and death. And so when he goes into the world of the dead, it's really pretty horrible, and she describes it in a horrific way. And I don't know, it really struck me. And so I've got here, I don't know why they're pigeons, but it's the world, the world of the dead between them. And so we've got living and the dead. The other one is what I was calling like the tattoo pigeon. It just reminds me of a big tattoo or something like that. And it's like a tough guy pigeon. Mostly, like I say, I like birds. We have pit birds, and I'm sort of drawn to them. These used a lot of the chalk too. This is some, you probably know Lisa Dresch, and she taught an altered books class a long time ago at the Washington Pavilion when she was there, and really got into altered books for quite a while. And this is one of them. And I was just kind of looking through, when I was looking at those art pictures, I was surprised, well, there's another bird in there, and it's representative of disaster. And Vietnam War. So I just wanted to put that in there to show the symbolism of the crow or the raven. And also that I appreciate other mediums. This is the last slide, and this is more of what I'm doing now, I think. I still do a little bit of everything, and I'm experimenting with watercolors and gouache. But this is acrylic on printmaking paper. And it was started plein air with my friend Chris Carmody Reeves. We went out to Arrowhead Park, and golly, it was so windy. It was so hard to keep. I'm sure you've all experienced that. Anyway, so I got a good start on it and took some pictures, and then I finished it up in the studio later on. And it's probably about 11 by 14 or something like that. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Vickie. So explain real quickly, so just so everybody knows if they aren't familiar with the process, your nature prints are actually, you're like inking leaves, wings, and things, and printing that, and then adding the coloration and developing the scene, right? Yeah. Just want to make sure everybody understood that.
Yes, I mean, I'm using the fresh plants. You could use dried plants. I like the fresh plants. And so all the nature prints are the actual size of the plants, and it's kind of interesting because when I would do like the Brookings Arts Festival, people, do you have a larger version of this or something? I mean, you really can't make it original and go larger or smaller. And it's trying to explain that it was the actual plants. And so that was interesting. And I noticed, other people have used plants for monoprints too. It's really nothing new. I like this treatment of it because I like the old botanical looks. And so I used an oil-based ink up the plant and basically press it or transfer it onto the paper. And after all of that is dried, I go in with washes of acrylic and finish it off. That way, I don't finish it off, but I finish it. And so, the dragonfly and the butterflies, I take the wings and actually carefully ink those up with an oil-based brayer and press those down there too. And so it's an exciting process. Anything can happen, as you know, with printmaking, and you can get some thumbprints, fingerprints all over everything and all that. And I have also printed fish, and that was really what I started with, was printing fish, which is kyotaku. It's a Japanese art form, but the nature printers combine the fish printing and the plant printing. And I made like one too many walleye prints, and I just couldn't do it anymore.
I bet.
Okay. Anyway, does that answer your question?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. That's great. Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay. Well, I won't give too much of an introduction. I just actually found out tonight I've had Desy and some governor's biennials in the past, but she's been teaching out at BHSU for the past 9 years. So we're excited to hear from Desy. I don't think I've ever really talked to her in person myself, which is terrible. So happy to have you. And I will just pass it over to Desy. Good to have you here.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here. Can everybody hear me okay? Do I sound all right? Great. Thanks, Jodi. Let me go ahead and get my PowerPoint going. Sorry, this is from the beginning. Okay, kind of that was my last slide with my contact information at the very end. But so I'm Desy Schoenewies. I am currently teaching at Black Hills State University. I am also originally from St. Louis, Missouri. So I kind of have one foot in Missouri and one foot in South Dakota, I feel like, most of the time in my life. I featured most of this PowerPoint in here of some of my paintings, but I do a little bit of everything, honestly, when it comes to art. I mostly do oil paint and oil work, and so that's what I have mostly in this PowerPoint here. I also play around with encaustics, which is working with wax. And when I work with wax, I use some kind of multimedia stuff. I did also include this image of my studio, since I can't quite set up my Zoom in the studio space. It's just too sunny right now, but I wanted to kind of throw that in there as well. Just a couple of the paintings that I've done when I first moved here. I was really interested in the people of South Dakota, and I was also really interested in the landscape. I'm from flatlands, and so just being around the canyon and being around the trees and mountains and the interesting and colorful personalities, especially around Sturgis, have always just drawn me in. And I was also kind of just interested in sort of maybe some counterculture things as well. So the graffiti arts that exist in Rapid City. And so with this piece was my first entry into the biennials where I was fortunate enough to get into. This is my example of an encaustic piece. Where it's done with layers of wax and oils. This is another encaustic one coming up here as well. My husband and I decided to take a bicycle ride across the state of Missouri back in 2017. And when we did that, I took a lot of photographs and I was inspired by the Missouri landscape. And so I kind of did some works based on as you can see from those previous pieces. I think this whole PowerPoint, by the way, kind of loops back and forth. So I can go back and stop the PowerPoint at any point and just focus on one image at a time. But the bicycle trip was kind of a trip because, you know, we spent 5 days cycling across the entire state of Missouri across a former rails to trails, kind of like the Mixon. And so I had all kinds of plans to do the same thing with the with capturing images and putting layers of imagery and pieces with the Nicholson as well. So some of the work that I do. So I work in oils, I work in caustics, I do illustrations. I've been working with murals in Spearfish. I've also do some comic book stuff. I do illustrations. I'm actually also working on a research project. So I'm engaged in all kinds of stuff right now. But one of the things about the pandemic, of course, that really kind of froze me, I guess, in some ways, is that PowerPoint went super fast. And so sorry about that. Let me go ahead and go back to and just kind of focus on a couple slides here, one at a time. I thought my timing was going to be a little bit longer for that. So let's see. All right. Let me share my screen again. And I'll just click on like one slide at a time here. So the pandemic. So what happened in 2020 was obviously very interesting for everybody. And kind of a scary time. Spring of 2020, I was fortunate enough to be on a sabbatical. I had been looking forward to the sabbatical so that I could finish the research project that I had been working on for about 10 years. Where I grew up in St. Louis no longer exists. My entire neighborhood was taken via eminent domain over a 20-year period. So the airport in St. Louis, Lambert International Airport, could expand and build a brand new runway. It was a 20-year project that devastated our entire neighborhood and a little bit over a square mile, including 2,000 houses, 65 businesses, 6 schools, 6 churches, and of course, our house is now, obviously no longer exists. Where our house used to be, we're at the very tail end of this whole buyout process, and so my mother and stepdad and I had to basically watch as our entire neighborhood was slowly erased over a period of time. And so I basically grew up even kind of taking photographs of empty houses, my old friends' houses, and then even my own house. And I actually got to watch my house being torn down, throughout this process. And I'm currently writing a book about, this whole, thing that is a lived experience. And lived experiences, of course, are things that always influence us in our artwork. So my sabbatical in 2020 was supposed to be writing a book, finishing up the book anyway. It's about, I'd say about 90% done at this point, but finishing up this book that I've been working on for 10 years of my old neighborhood. Instead, I was not able to travel back to St. Louis. I started off the sabbatical in St. Louis. I came back here in February. And I was supposed to be back in St. Louis in March of 2020. And I have not been back to St. Louis since February of 2020. So I spent the rest of my sabbatical painting. That seemed the appropriate thing to do since I couldn't go to the archives at the Missouri Historical Society and other places that I needed to finish my research so that I could finally finish and process this book. So instead, I kind of started thinking back to other abandoned spaces and, really reflecting back on who I am as an artist and, again, my old past lived experience. My first job was working in a grocery store. And one of the things about the pandemic, and I also kind of preface this too with, I also have a number of very unusual autoimmune issues. So I started off the pandemic absolutely cloistered and sheltered in the house. My husband was doing all of the grocery shopping, and even he was wearing like a hazmat suit, and we were bringing in groceries into the garage and bleaching everything down. I actually really love grocery stores. I love the visualizations. I love the colors. I love how I am, again, just working and stocking at a grocery store when I was 16 just kind of gave me this sort of love affair with, just kind of seeing things on the shelves and how things are displayed and so forth. And so I started kind of looking back at some other groups of abandoned photographers that I used to belong to years ago. And I found that this grocery store, this image that I've been kind of working with a little bit, this image was taken, the image that I painted from was taken in 1960, I want to say 63. This was a supermarket that had just opened, and this was the opening day of a particular supermarket. This supermarket right now today in New Jersey is sitting open and abandoned and heavily graffitied. And I kind of wanted to sort of put a little bit of the sort of ominous feeling into this particular painting. And this is the painting that's in the Biennial, along with this sort of like weird social energy within this space. And so this is a very clustered space. I was drawn to this photograph, stared at this photograph for hours, worked with transfers, layered this thing over and over, and finally finished it. It took forever, painting cans. And I think that's just how, how focused I tend to get when I'm into painting, is I get really just into it. And one of the things that I kind of wanted to really kind of bring out in this is the sort of like duality between ominous and also this sort of like happy day, this sort of like opening day. And, some of the figures in here are socializing, and you can see them sort of talking to each other. And yet there's like this one child that's kind of looking out into us, right? And it's the only person in the whole 30-something person field in this space that's actually looking out at you. And so he's the he that realized that he would be the last thing, to exist. He's one of the younger children in the work, and none of these cans exist anymore. None of these stock shelves exist anymore. Really, the space is now currently almost nearly completely condemned, except for people who are going into those spaces and, graffitiing. Kind of like the spaces, of course, that I grew up around. Where I grew up in a very seemingly traditional urban suburban kind of mixed space, and now of course it's slowly turned into this erasure, right? These buildings were, these homes, these businesses, they were being graffitied and so forth. And I've tracked all of that and uploaded images and wrote about it on my blog. The blog kind of took off over time and so forth. So I'm kind of connecting what's happening with the pandemic also a little bit with my, this lived experience that I had in the past. And of course, that also, got me into working with, I can't just do one painting. I have to do many and jump into and do more, right? And so I started working on a few other ones as well. And sometimes I work really precisely, and other times I want to blur space. And I also want to blur time and blur memories, sometimes put the same individuals in different places, interacting in different ways. So this one here, ghosts, and they seem to have it easier than we do now. You can see the girl kind of in an older position as well in a younger position. And you can also kind of see the hint of the face masks that's within the space. Same thing with the woman who is older versus her younger self in the same image. But I was also in this image too, really kind of drawn to the food prices, right? I would kill to pay 50 cents for ice cream, right now. This next one here, I also kind of wanted to, again, just play with this idea of juxtapositioning space and time within the same frame. So I found this lovely image of a group of, group of workers, at this particular Albertsons. This mid-century modern style building, these very large spaces where people come and people are social. And then what oftentimes happens to these spaces when they become too outdated, if you will. A lot of mid-century modern architecture is not being preserved right now. A lot of that is being mowed over, which is kind of a shame. I absolutely love mid-century modern aesthetics. And, I came across this image that just reminds me of so many other buildings and spaces, with these, multicolored, multifaceted, but of course you can see a clear abandonment at the top. This one was just actually accepted into an international exhibition called We're Doing It All Wrong in Dayton, Ohio. And the theme about this exhibition is kind of talking a little bit about how quickly society changes. And I really kind of like the idea that artists are addressing what we're doing wrong within society. And that's kind of was part of the artist statement that I put forth in this biennial is, we're kind of approaching how, we handle grocery shopping wrong, right? We started off with these corner markets, then we have these very large grocery stores that are just enormous spaces of abundance. And now all of a sudden, we are demanding that these things are being delivered, via Instacart, via Amazon, via all these places to our doorstep. And we're abandoning these very large spaces in a very quick period of time. So, and I'm continuing to kind of explore this theme and work through this theme. And also too, again, this combination of time and sequence, kind of playing a little bit with that mid-century modern aesthetic, overlapping and integrated with more contemporary aesthetics. So Ghosts that She Never Had to Shop Like We Do Now, that definitely features this younger woman, kind of looking over her shoulder, with this family unit that just seems to be freely grabbing boxes off the shelf. And that is about it regarding my work. So, and again, I have some contact information if you guys wanted to know more. And the 56housesleft.com, that's the blog that I have I kind of abandoned a little bit because my neighborhood has been abandoned for a long time, but it's really interesting how a lot of former residents still will write into the blog and leave stories behind about their homes within that space in St. Louis. And the book that I will be writing is titled 56 Houses. And so hopefully I can get that thing finished. That's my goal for the summer, is to get it finished and get it sent off to a publisher so that by this time next year it is printed and done. So, thank you. That is all I've got for you guys.
Thank you, Desy. That was awesome. So too, I wanted to point out, because I don't know if it necessarily comes across in the catalog that the piece in the show, you have got the ghost images of the people so you do see the little bit of the mask there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that might pass some people by if they haven't come to see it in person. But
there's a few little hints of that.
Yeah, you do. When you see the 5x5 painting, you're like, oh, I really see it now. So come and check it out. But thank you so much.
Thanks.
Okay, we will pass it over to Chris Meyer, and he is the sculpture professor down at USD. So excited to have him. Thank you for coming, Chris.
Hey, thanks for having me, Jodi. Yeah, well, I don't know. This has been an interesting year. I've had to make lots of changes. You mentioned that I teach sculpture, and that was one of my biggest concerns last semester. In the spring of 2020, we went on quarantine, lockdown, and all the classes that I taught had to become remote. And as you know, sculpture is a pretty physical medium. A lot of what we do can't be done without the use of the facilities that we even have. So it's been a challenge. A lot of what we did was kind of pretend sculpture last semester. This semester, thankfully, and last semester too, in the fall, we were face to face. It meant a lot more changes in terms of things. I've had to separate classes and have multiple things happening in different parts of the studio. So I feel like a ping pong ball in there, kind of bouncing off the walls back and forth, giving demonstrations so many more times than normal, answering a lot more questions and cleaning so many more tools. It's been kind of a nightmare. I'm looking forward to people getting vaccinated. Travel plans, conferences, exhibition opportunities have all just kind of evaporated a little bit this year. So it's been a little bit of a year of introspection, trying to do my work. A lot of the iron casting requires a lot of people to come together, at least a minimum of 10 to kind of pull anything off. So we've kind of established a core group in the region, Minnesota and South Dakota close by, that we've gotten together a few times throughout the year to create some work, but it's been certainly a challenge. So I guess with that, I'm going to move into my PowerPoint presentation in just a moment here. Let me start sharing my screen. Can you all see this yet?
Good.
Can you see anything at all yet? There we go.
Yep, you're good.
Okay. Well, there's the close-up of a mask. Obviously, as we came back to school, normally in the school year, I start to grow out a beard, and last fall I was a lot more paranoid about everything, and so everything was clean shaven, and I wore a lot of masks. I don't necessarily find a lot of people, even in the community that I live in, a college town, necessarily wearing masks all the time. It's a challenge. If you go out and about, there's a lot of confrontation about it. Just a different mentality everywhere you look. So that combined with just the added focus onto South Dakota kind of made me want to make a mask of my, or a self-portrait wearing a mask. So this was done with a skin-safe silicone mold rubber. And I'm actually wearing a mask in it. I got one of those little nose bridges that you can put underneath a mask so I could fish straws to breathe out of it. And I've had my face molded before for projects, and this was honestly the most uncomfortable. I even had a moment where I thought I was going to have to rip the mold off my face, and I had to really just concentrate on breathing and calming down. It was kind of like wearing a mask all day long, to be quite honestly, just all compressed down into a 45-minute, hour-long session. Really uncomfortable. I had very little of this molding rubber left. It's a little bit on the oldish side, and the quality of the mold that was pulled off of it, although it shows all the details, even able to capture the mask and things, was a little rougher than normal. But I decided to leave that there, all that kind of wear, that chasing that you might have on a plate, flashing, all those kinds of little marks that are part of the process kind of left in there as kind of a sense of wear, history of the mask wear, the burden that it is to wear the mask, and the burden that it is to go out in places where there aren't necessarily people wearing masks, and the feeling of being uncomfortable no matter what you do. When you're out amongst people, including the anxiety of, who's got it and who doesn't. So it's kind of filtered into some of my work. This is another piece that revolves around the pandemic. It was called Prescription, and it was done using actual masks. Some of the very few last N95s that I could have. I used to provide them for my students for my beginning class, and a variety of other masks, but they've been stained with red iron oxide and then strung together kind of like a daisy chain on this IV rack. And the idea is that it represents something that is meant to aid in our restoration as a medicine of sorts. It's stained in red iron oxide because iron is the element that enables us to move oxygen through our blood and around our bodies, enable us to breathe. I find that relationship to a face mask to be very, very sound. The color of red also talks about life and also death. And the starkness kind of the image, I think, speaks a little bit about the pandemic and some of the politicization of a simple thing like a mask. So on those lines, not all of my work is been driven around the pandemic. It's been hard to make work this year. I have, but a lot of my work has been political. Certainly the last maybe 5 years or so. This piece is called Diminishing Returns, and it is an old kind of dilapidated wheelbarrow that is, in this stage, beginning to be filled with these old, rusty, solid cast iron knots. Some of them weigh as much as 75 pounds on down. So at this point, I now have 48 knots cast. They're all rusted. One to represent every month that our former president was the president. And the piece talks about a lack of progress forward, an old way forward in terms of technologies, in terms of perspectives, and how that went off the rails and it's kind of falling apart. Those tie into it. I've also done political performance pieces. I do a lot of cast iron, and in that world, I'm kind of known for more of my performance work. This is a piece called the Golden Ballot Box, and I'm sitting here like the thinker on a golden toilet, spray painted toilet, which we then poured iron into. Yeah, I even like plunged it pretty hard too. So yeah, I get to do opportunities like this across the country. This was originally a performance planned for the National Conference on Contemporary Cast Iron Art and Practices in Birmingham, Alabama. This was in 2019, but we were rained out for the finale performance. So this actually happened at a pour that I host at my home studio in rural Clay County called A Little Pour on the Prairie. It was a really fun year that year. I invited most of the performance artists that were unable to cast and do their pieces at SLOSS that year. SLOSS Historical Furnaces is where the conference is held. Yeah, so it was a lot of fun. But I also cast iron in traditional mold making processes. These are bonded sand molds. My pattern material is a little bit unorthodox. So these are all made by taking packing materials, air pillows, bubble wrap, packing peanuts, all this stuff that can't be recycled, some of it, that comes with all of the stuff, the excess of stuff that we order. And this has been compounded perhaps during the pandemic as well. Almost everybody has ordered things online, sometimes because you just can't get out and do your shopping, even food in places of the country. And I think a lot of people were just bored and shopping a lot too, you know, which is ridiculous. But this is a series that deals with excess for me. And I think the pandemic really kind of pushed that home. So this piece is called Avalanche Sequence. And it's 3 little series of mountains. I see these pieces as kind of landscapes. I travel a lot in the West for cast iron. And so we road trip everywhere that we go because we have to carry all this equipment and gear and molds and everything with us. And I really enjoy the drives. I went to graduate school in Missoula, Montana, and I miss the mountains. So these piles, these mountains, they do kind of take on a landscape symbolism for me. Here's a detail up close of some of these things. There's another piece called Sugar Mountain, same kind of series of work. Another piece. I really like the way that the sand mold kind of, you know, constricts the air bags when you're making the mold, so they seem like they're compressed. You can get a lot of you know, interesting marks and make them look like they're defying gravity and all kinds of things. Unfortunately, with this process, it allows me to get away with a lot of undercuts in the mold making process, because I can go in and I pop all the bags and deflate everything, and then I can pull it out of the mold. But I'm left with, in places, some very heavy castings. For example, like that little suspended bag that's there is solid. This piece probably weighs close to 75, 80 pounds, you know, which is unfortunate. Iron is cheap in terms of a material to cast with, although everything's becoming more and more expensive, especially in this last year. But maybe 25 cents a pound versus right now for bronze, it's the going rates up to 50 pounds is close to $7 a pound. So it's really allows you to make a lot more work. It allows you to learn a lot more foundry practices and to do work that you wouldn't be able to afford otherwise. I also do a lot of crazy performance things. These are reaction molds where you're building a mold that is intended to react with the iron that's poured into it. So this is actually a naturally hollowed piece of eastern red cedar, a log, a stump, that I sealed the bottom with a steel plate. This is actually the first reaction mold performance piece that I ever did, and it's the largest explosion that I've ever been able to create. I've never made one quite as big as that since. But these pieces, while they're a spectacle, you could never afford to do it with any other metal, yield some very beautiful, elaborate pieces that you really couldn't create any other way. So what I'm kind of left with as a remnant of this casting performance is kind of almost like a petrified stump of a tree. All the patina that's on these pieces happens naturally as the log burns out, and it gets to the right temperature where it produces red iron oxide on it that's not true rust. You can sometimes get blues and greens and all kinds of different crazy colors out of some of these pieces. And they still, most of them have, they're basically a younger version of the tree, the core wood that's rotted away. So my intent with these pieces is to cast enough of them to create a shelter belt, which is something that I see disappearing around me all the time. I live in southeast South Dakota on a acreage, and I see trees being ripped out every year. Masses of mountains on this to be burned down to get a little bit more ground to plant on. I see tiling happening all around me, and it's another, I guess, an ecological issue for me. Just loss of habitat, not just for the wildlife, but even just erosion. There was a reason why we planted these trees, 80 years ago, and now we're starting to rip them all out just to get another little bit of space to plant. But not everything I do is political. I'm enthralled with processes, elemental work. This is a wood carved piece. I started out sculpting as a wood carver. So this is a piece of ash that I had carved and then made a sand mold of and cast, and then I welded all these little strips of steel onto. Really, as I was starting to get into cast iron to see what I could do with it, if I could weld steel to it, how well it would weld. It's called derivative. Kind of looks like an atomic strawberry or something, I don't know, with a mohawk. Just an aesthetic piece. I kind of am longing lately to make more work that it goes back to an aesthetical approach of things with materials and form, color, and get away from politics for a while. It would be nice to feel like I can do that without things dragging on my practice while I'm making other things. This is a piece called Gray Material, kind of before all this political stuff happened. And it was me imagining what a fungus would look like if it were on the outside. Most of the time when you see a mushroom, that's just the fruiting body of a larger fungal body that's either in the ground or in a tree or whatever. And I was just trying to think about what that might look like if you could see it. So this is an old elm tree that I shaped. It's got some silver on it from being oxidized by the sun. And then we had an ice storm, and we had about a 1/4 inch of ice on all of these silver maple flowers, and it knocked a bunch of them down. So I gathered them out and I burned them out directly and cast them in bronze, patinaed them, and then inserted them into this carving that I did. And then also made this carved foam form and then felted that with wool to create the form. So I like to work with lots of different materials, kind of whatever it needs to be. What I like about Foundry is the community aspect of it. I guess this is kind of a nice segue into community. This is a piece I did for the Vermilion Hospital, the Sanford Hospital down here. They were tearing down Dakota Hospital, which was one of the first community-based hospitals that started, not affiliated with a church or anything. It was the community of Vermilion that came together to build this hospital in 1919 or something like that. 1905, I think they started. So they wanted to do a piece that commemorated it, and I was approached, and I had this idea kind of immediately about these hands kind of grasping each other, moving off in one direction, thinking about community, what a health center is, what it is for community health, what it takes to establish something like this, particularly back in 1905. So what I did was made hand molds using that same skin safe silicone of 150 community members having an affiliation with a hospital story. People anywhere from 6 years old to 96 years old. It was a long process, maybe. I think we did the molding over 6 sessions, maybe in about 8 months. And then the piece I worked on for about 2 years, a little over that. A lot of molding all the way around, but this skin safe silicone gives you so much detail. I mean, all the skin pores, everybody's fingerprints. I have to smear things out in places so you couldn't like pull a fingerprint off of the castings. Rings you can cast and things like that. But talking to all the people and sharing all the stories when you're making these pieces is really kind of the icing on the cake. You know, you think about that when you're putting all these things together. Even though you might not have marked or even know whose individual hand it is that you're working with at the time, you're still thinking about all of that, you know, experience, all of those stories, which is, again, a reflection of this year. I couldn't have never done a project like this, you know, in this pandemic at all. I also work in installation. So this is kind of a strange view. It looks like a bunch of little birds maybe flying like a flock of birds or something, but what they actually are is, well, there's about 5,000 honey locust thorns that are glued to a wall. Honey locust thorns can be immense. They are a terrifying tree if you've ever seen one, completely covered with thorns. The idea for this was kind of thinking about a briar patch, this installation. So I wanted to create this kind of pathway moving around the gallery walls of all these thorns, thickening in places, thinning in places, some very new, fresh looking thorns, some older kind of graying thorns, which they do turn kind of gray as they old, just like we do. And also these cast aluminum thorns. And I saw all these things, these thorns, as trials, you know, as challenges in your life. These are the things that we are encountered throughout one's life that kind of define who you are, the way that you move through life. Some of them are imagined, fabricated challenges that we present ourselves. Maybe those are the cast aluminum thorns. Others are very much real that you have to negotiate. So yeah, this is the very first Little Pour on the Prairie that I hosted out at my house. I guess it'll be 8 years ago this summer. There was about 20 of us there. So a rag take crew from across maybe 4 states around here. And now it's growing last year to be huge. We had people from, well, not last year. Last year was also very small, much like the first year, but we still had something. The year before that, we had people from 16 states come. And it's a lot of fun. That's what I miss about this year. I miss not being able to see people. The image that you see there is almost like a second family to me. And I just don't get to see anybody. And for me, I don't know, I've gotten burned out with social media, and plus with all the political stuff that's out there, it's hard to look at it sometimes. You encounter things that you don't want to see. And so I myself have kind of shied away from a lot of that, which has been a little bit of a handicap dealing with the pandemic. So yeah, it's been calling people, trying to talk to people and reach out and have some sort of, you know, communication and relationship still through all of this. But yeah, I'm looking forward to doing this again with more people and having fun. So I'm going to do the Little Pour on the Prairie this summer. It's probably going to be on July 17th at this point. If you're interested or you know people who are, you can find my email on USD's website. That's probably the best place to find me right now. So I think that's all I have.
Sounds like a guild road trip to me. What do you guys think? Time to go to the little pour on the prairie,
I'm in.
right? Yeah, that was
The last
awesome.
time we had the last finale thing that we did, we always save the crazy stuff for at dark, and as everything's getting done, was this Ferris wheel that a person made that was like 12-foot diameter wheel with 4 independently spinning 3-foot wheels within that, and they were all spinning, and then they dumped iron on it, and it looked like it was the only thing I've ever walked away from, had to like move away from in course.
I was gonna say, how do you enforce the safety protocols there? Looks like
Well,
a
I mean,
challenge.
yeah. It is, I guess. But you know, anybody on the floor is kind of aware of what you're doing. It's the crowd you have to worry about, because they're all like, "Oh, it's you know," but you're like, "No, really, you need to move back a little bit further with this one."
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much. You know, if anybody has any questions, they could just unmute themselves and throw it out there, or put it in the chat. You know, I've got a couple things in mind if no one else has any, but thank you all 3 of you for sharing this with us. It is such a, we heard from a rich range of practices, materials, and approaches, so it was really fun to hear that mixture all together, for me at least. You know, I am curious when, you know, obviously the pandemic, I think every artist, even those that it didn't really enter into their practices in this year, it had to occur to them at some point, whether it would or could or should, or whether they were really averse to it and escaping from that. So was there like a moment where you felt like, this has to come into my work? Or how did you make that kind of decision to even allow it to enter? Was it very organic? Was there like a kind of pivotal moment that you can identify where you're like, this needs to be here, or I feel like my practice is shifting to address this? So that's one thing I'm curious about, and I think all 3 of you could probably answer that. Whoever wants to start, if you have something to share, go for it.
Well, I guess for me, like specific politicized items haven't really come into my practice until maybe the last 4 years. So maybe it was a little bit easier to allow that to come into my practice. And it also feels like if it took that long to get to that point for that, this is much larger, and it seeped into everything. So for me, it makes sense that it's seeped into my practice as well. You know, you can't help it. You can't escape it. It's everywhere you go. So
yeah. And that mask is an object, you know, within your, like, there's so many objects you can identify with these things like that have become iconic. So it's curious to me how that comes into play. And just the visual culture of everything shifted with all of this too, and what we were seeing and where we were seeing it. How about you, Vickie? Go ahead, Vic. Go ahead, Chris.
Well, I agree with Chris. Yeah, I don't think anyone really can come out of this pandemic unscathed. You know, I mean, it affected everyone in some way, and it's the sense of isolation, and you know, and a lot of depression. I think I was really pretty depressed a lot of last year, and but then a lot of people were, you know, it was like you really had no control over your life, I suppose, is what a lot of that was. And I think that in art you can express yourself a little bit. I had trouble even making art. It was really just a tough year.
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering about. Yeah. How about you, Desy? Because I mean, you've got the kind of the grocery store, you had the vanishing neighborhood thing was already a part of and then you're finding these masks and ghosts kind of entering into those paintings. How did that progress for you?
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's a lot of layers to it, and I tend to layer in my work extensively. But I think for me, I didn't have any other project or any other goal going on at the time except for, you know,
Sure.
writing this book, and then that got put on hold. And, you know, once you finish the, you know, watching Netflix and watching The Office, what else are you going to do, right? You're going to make artwork. So never seen The Office before, and then suddenly I'm watching TV. Like, I don't ever watch TV, and I was watching TV just to escape. You know, but as soon as I you know, went back into the studio, and it was like, okay, I literally have got to make art. Like, I'm not teaching classes at this moment. I've got to do something. I can't finish this book at this moment. So what am I going to do in this moment? Well, obviously I have to respond to this moment, right? And I think as artists, you know, artists do respond to the world around them. And I've also noticed that not only are there calls for entries for pandemic response, but I think a lot of artists right now, the artwork has become a lot more grounded in a way, a lot more guttural, I think is the word I was using earlier when, you know, before we started the formal discussion. You know, I was talking about the high school exhibition, the statewide high school exhibition. I'm really excited about these high school kids coming up and coming into our college classes next semester, because they're going to bring a certain sense of honesty, and also I think a certain sense of at the same time, coming out of this pandemic, they have a lot of goals that they want to see turn into reality. And so I think that the pandemic did lead to some dark times. And I think all of us were in a headspace of darkness for a while. You know, we were concerned about health, and concerned about, you know, the lives of our loved ones that we couldn't physically be with, right? And that's the same for everyone. But I think right now there's also this sense of hope, and there's this sense of we're going to, you know, I think in kind of in terms of talking to Chris and his work, there's a response that's going to hopefully become an actual engagement in change in society. And I think that art, we drive that change, right? I mean, we push for that change, and we try to speak to that change. And what kind of changes do we need to make necessary? I think, you know, we are all responding to that in a way.
Yeah. Yeah, it was undeniable. We all shifted. And that's why I think it is so interesting to see how that plays out in artist practices. I do, and everybody didn't get to hear that earlier, but I was observing, you know, we have, I think I counted around 9 or so artists that clearly the pandemic entered into their work of the 66 in the show. And I thought it was interesting because I think some artists, and this is where Desy brought up the high school, the statewide high school show, she felt was really, I mean, flooded with the presence of it, and how artists who are maybe more set in their practice or have established established a practice period, maybe they were able to stay on that path, but high school artists, that was so raw for them that it really did dominate their reality to that degree that they didn't have some other practice already there to go to. So it is, I think, fascinating how we all shift and how artists shifted with this. And I do think there's definitely some hope in that, you know, we will get through this. Things will be changed, and not all for the worse, for sure. Some things will be changed for the better. It is hopeful. Does anyone have any other questions? We did have one here about, does Vickie know the meaning of her Asian letters? What language in your prints, your nature prints?
Well, you mean where my signature is?
I think so. It must be the kind
seal?
of the text printing, yeah,
Okay.
on there. Yeah, must be your
well,
artist seal.
I had it. Well, since I started out with fish printing, and that is a Japanese art form, and so it's, you know, and then that just kind of moved into the nature printing with the plants. So, but anyway, yes, I did have it carved for me, and I wanted it carved to say someone who makes shoes, you know, kind of like Schumacher, because otherwise they can do it as a translation of that. But I thought it'd be more fun to have some kind of a pun, you know, like cobbler, you know, but it would be my name. And So that's what it is. It's
Well,
not
that
satanic.
was
It's not at one of the arts festivals. The woman actually was worried it was a satanic symbol on my art. No, it's not.
just don't play the nature prints backwards, because that's when you'll hear the voice of the devil. No, that was a neat little tidbit then. At the end here. That's funny. I like that. Well, does anyone have anything else? Otherwise, I'd just like to say thank you all for joining us. I feel like it's so enriching to hear everybody's experiences with their work like this. So we thank you for coming and doing this with us. Yeah.
Thank you, Jodi.
Okay.
Yes, thank
you,
you.
Jodi.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Carolyn. Thank you, Jodi.
Carolyn.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
you're welcome. Thank you all. This was great.
Yeah. And thanks for everybody for tuning in and joining us. Take care. We'll see you next.